There's something strange about fear. It doesn't care how famous you are. It doesn't care how perfect your life looks on Instagram. And it certainly doesn't care if your last name is Bieber. For years, Hailey Bieber walked runways in Milan, Paris, New York. She smiled for the cameras. She posed. She waved. But behind the perfect symmetry of a cover shoot, there was something else. Something that made her heart race, her palms sweat, her voice tremble. She was terrified, not of falling, not of criticism, but of speaking publicly, of being misheard, misjudged, or simply not enough. Everyone has that one moment when they say, "I'm done hiding." For Hailey, it was that night. One single night, she promised herself to face it all. She stood in the wings of a glowing auditorium. Hundreds of eyes waiting. Cameras blinking red. A speech in her trembling hands. Her voice rehearsed 1,000 times. And yet, nothing could prepare her for what was about to happen. This is the story of Hailey Bieber. The night she confronted her greatest fear, and everything went wrong. Who is Hailey Bieber? To some, she's just a last name, a Bieber by marriage, a supporting character in a global love story that's played out across headlines, red carpets, and social media feeds. But Hailey's story didn't start with Justin, and it certainly doesn't end there. Born Hailey Baldwin on November 22, 1996, in Tucson, Arizona, she grew up in the shadow, and sometimes in the spotlight, of one of Hollywood's most recognizable families. Her father, Stephen Baldwin, was an actor. Her uncles, Alec, Daniel, and William, household names. Fame was familiar, but not always comfortable. From a young age, Hailey knew what it meant to be looked at, talked about, judged before being understood. But unlike many who inherit fame, Hailey didn't rush into the center of it. In fact, her first dream had nothing to do with the runway or the red carpet. She wanted to be a ballerina. She trained seriously, passionately, until a foot injury closed that chapter far earlier than she expected. The stage she had dreamed of was gone, and she had to find a new one. Modeling came next, not because it was expected, but because it felt like a way to rebuild. A way to redefine. She signed with Ford models in her teens, appearing in campaigns for Ralph Lauren, Tommy Hilfiger, and Guess. Soon came the runway shows in New York, London, Milan, Paris. Photographers wanted her. Designers admired her look, the classic American beauty with sharp edges, poised energy, and a rare stillness in a chaotic industry. But as her modeling career rose, so did the attention. Some admired her discipline. Others dismissed her as just another Nepo baby. She was constantly compared to Kendall, to Gigi, to Bella, and of course, to Justin's past. That attention turned into noise, and that noise into pressure. Still, Hailey held herself with quiet strength. She wasn't the loudest in the room. She wasn't chasing virality. She was building something slower, something real. Beyond the photo shoots, she was developing her voice, her sense of purpose. She launched her skincare brand, Rhode, a name that carries her own middle name, a subtle, confident reclaiming of identity. Then there's her presence online. On the surface, it's curated, polished. But in between the flawless images and brand collaborations, Hailey has also shown vulnerability, speaking about anxiety, mental health, body image, and the complexity of living under a microscope. She didn't ask to be the internet's favorite target, but she learned how to survive it. And of course, there's her relationship with Justin. A whirlwind, a fairy tale, and sometimes a battleground. Their marriage has been celebrated and scrutinized in equal measure. Through it all, Hailey has remained composed, even when every facial expression became a meme, every silence a headline. So who is Hailey Bieber? She's a model, a brand founder, a wife, a woman of faith, a person who grew up in a world where everyone had something to say, but who has been learning slowly and publicly how to say things for herself. And perhaps more than anything, she is someone who knows what it means to be afraid and still show up anyway. What is the fear? For most people, fear hides in the corners of the mind, irrational, quiet, and personal. It might be the fear of flying, of failing, of being left behind. For Hailey Bieber, it was none of those things. Her fear was something far more invisible, yet deeply paralyzing. It was the fear of being seen, not just looked at, but truly seen. And more than that, the fear of being misunderstood. From the outside, it seems impossible. Hailey is constantly in front of cameras. She's walked in front of crowds, posed for millions of flashing lights, spoken into microphones. But all of that is different. Modeling is a performance, a curated silence, an image carefully crafted. It doesn't require vulnerability. It doesn't require her voice. Her real fear? Speaking. Not just public speaking in the traditional sense, but opening her mouth and letting the world into her mind, into her truth, into her heart. Because once you speak, truly speak, there's no taking it back. You risk judgment. You risk distortion. You risk being reduced to a soundbite. Hailey once admitted that her anxiety would skyrocket any time she had to speak in front of people. Even in interviews, the pressure to say the right thing, to appear calm, collected, articulate, it would weigh on her like a silent storm. Her heart would pound, her mouth would go dry, and her mind would race with worst-case scenarios. What if I freeze? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I become a headline? This fear wasn't born overnight. It built slowly, piece by piece, from years of being watched, judged, labeled. In the early days, she was the Baldwin niece. Then Justin's rebound. Then the wife. Then the villain in some imaginary rivalry with people she barely knew. Every word she said became ammunition for internet debates. Every silence became suspicious. And every attempt to defend herself only seemed to make things worse. So, like many people who live under relentless scrutiny, Hailey began to protect herself in the only way she knew how, by staying quiet, by choosing stillness over exposure, by letting others fill the silence for her. But silence isn't the same as peace, and staying small isn't the same as being safe. Deep down, Hailey wanted to break free from that fear. She wanted to speak for herself about her struggles, her truth, her version of the story. Not through a brand, not through a filtered caption, but through her actual voice. She wanted to be more than an image. She wanted to be real. But that takes courage. And the kind of courage she needed couldn't be bought, styled, or edited. It had to come from within, through trembling hands and a racing heart, through vulnerability. And one day, she decided she was ready to stand in front of people, ready to speak from the heart, ready to face the fear that had lived in her for so long. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, is that when that moment finally came, it wouldn't unfold the way she imagined. Because when you finally face your biggest fear, the hardest part isn't the fear itself. It's what happens if everything goes wrong. It had been building for months, maybe even years. A quiet pressure under the surface, like a wave gathering far out at sea. The desire to speak, to share, to stop hiding behind perfect images and let her real voice, her real self, come forward. Hailey Bieber had spent most of her life being watched, judged, interpreted, but never fully heard. And she knew it, she felt it. The internet had a version of her. The media had another. Even some fans of her husband had painted her into a role she didn't recognize. She had given so much of herself to silence, to restraint, to maintaining a calm exterior, even when her insides felt like a storm. But at some point, silence becomes unbearable, and Hailey had reached that point. So when the invitation came, an opportunity to speak publicly at a high-profile women's event in Los Angeles, a celebration of entrepreneurs, creators, and young leaders, she said yes. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was tired of being afraid. This was her moment, she thought. A turning point. A chance to finally confront the fear that had followed her like a shadow. In the weeks leading up to the event, she prepared obsessively. She wrote and rewrote her speech. She worked with a coach. She practiced in front of mirrors, in front of friends, in empty rooms. Every word mattered. Every pause was calculated. She wanted it to be perfect. But more than perfect, she wanted it to be honest. The speech wasn't about fame. It wasn't about her marriage. It was about identity, about self-worth, about what it means to exist in a world that constantly tells you who you are, and how hard it is to push back against that narrative. On the morning of the event, Hailey woke up before the sun. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were cold. Her mind was racing. She tried to eat but couldn't. She prayed. She breathed. She reminded herself, this is what growth feels like. It's not comfort. It's courage. The venue was packed. Influential women, industry leaders, media. The kind of audience that could change perceptions or cement them. Backstage, Hailey stood in silence, clutching her note cards. Dressed simply, elegantly. No dramatic makeup. No heavy styling. She wanted to feel real. She could hear the murmur of the crowd on the other side of the curtain. Every step closer to the stage felt heavier than the last. She took a deep breath. Another. Then the cue came. Her name was announced. The applause started. She stepped into the light. This was the moment. The moment she had feared for so long, and the moment she had chosen to meet head-on. Every eye in the room was on her. Every camera, every phone, every screen. Her voice was the only thing that could carry her through now. And for a second, just one beautiful second, she felt calm, present, brave. But fear, as she would soon find out, doesn't always vanish just because you're ready. Sometimes, it shows up right when you thought you had finally outrun it. Sometimes, even when you think you're prepared, it still finds a way to take the air from your lungs. And that's exactly what happened next. At first, it was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that presses on your chest like a weight. Hailey stood there, on stage, looking out at the sea of faces. Rows and rows of people waiting, watching, expecting. Her heart was pounding, so hard she could hear it in her ears. She opened her mouth to speak, and the first line came out, but not the way she practiced it. Her voice cracked, just slightly, barely noticeable to anyone else. But to her, it was like a fracture splitting through the surface of everything she had built to protect herself. She cleared her throat and tried again. The teleprompter glitched, a minor technical hiccup, just a few seconds of delay, but in that moment, it was catastrophic. Her mind scrambled to fill the silence. The words she had memorized felt like they were floating just out of reach. She looked down at her notes, but her hands were shaking. The cards blurred in front of her eyes. Her breath shortened. She tried to smile, tried to push through, but the calm she'd felt just moments before was gone. In its place, panic. And then, the worst part, the moment she had always feared most, began to unfold in real time. The audience began to shift. People checked their phones. A few whispered. Some looked confused. Others just stared. Not cruelly, not even critically. But in Hailey's mind, it felt like rejection. Like she was failing in front of everyone she had wanted to prove herself to. She stumbled through the next sentence. It came out rushed, clipped, robotic. Her natural voice, the one she had worked so hard to reclaim, disappeared behind a wall of nerves. One woman in the front row tilted her head. A blogger maybe, an influencer. The kind of person who would later tweet something like, "Is Hailey Bieber okay?" accompanied by a shaky clip pulled from a live stream. Her throat tightened. Her palms were sweating. She could feel heat rushing to her face. The lights above seemed brighter now, almost blinding. Every second on stage felt like an hour. Every second was a new opportunity to say the wrong thing, to be misquoted, misunderstood, mocked. She kept going, sentence by sentence. But by now, the rhythm was broken. The confidence she had built, layer by layer, had crumbled. And in its place was silence again, not the one she chose, but the one fear forced upon her. When she finally finished, the applause came. Polite, respectful, but not thunderous, not triumphant, just polite. She smiled. She nodded. She walked off the stage. And as soon as she stepped behind the curtain, she felt the tears rise. Not dramatic sobs, just the slow, burning kind that come when your body realizes it's no longer in survival mode. The kind of tears that say, "I didn't do it. I wasn't enough. I failed." Backstage, no one said the word failure. No one needed to. Her team offered hugs. A few kind words. "You were brave. It's okay. It wasn't that bad." But in Hailey's heart, it was that bad. Because it wasn't just about a speech. It was about years of silence. Years of feeling voiceless. Years of gathering the strength to say, "This is who I really am." And when the moment finally came, the fear won. Or so it seemed. By the time she got home that night, the clips were already circulating online. Some were supportive. Others were cruel. The internet did what it always does, dissected her facial expressions, picked apart her pauses, speculated about her emotions like they were public property. Hailey Bieber awkward on stage. Fans concerned after shaky performance. She's clearly not ready. And beneath it all, the one fear that had haunted her most had finally happened. She had tried to speak, and it had gone wrong. But what she didn't yet realize is that this moment, painful as it was, would become a quiet beginning, not an end. Because fear wins in silence. And even on the worst day, she had spoken anyway. The aftermath didn't come all at once. It never does. It came slowly, quietly, like the echo after a sharp sound in a big, empty room. The night she got home, Hailey didn't turn on the lights. She didn't check her phone. She sat on the floor in her oversized coat, knees drawn up to her chest, and stared at nothing. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop. It replayed the moments over and over, the quiver in her voice, the silence in the room, the glitching teleprompter, the feeling of being alone under the weight of so many eyes. It wasn't just disappointment she felt. It was grief. Grief for the version of herself she had hoped to be that night. Strong, composed, eloquent. Grief for the fantasy of overcoming fear in one perfect moment. Grief for the silence she thought she had finally left behind. But the world wasn't silent. By the next morning, social media was already buzzing. Hailey's name was trending, not for a scandal, not for a red carpet look, not even for something she did, but for how she had made people feel uncomfortable, nervous, unsteady, human. Some people were kind. Fans posted messages of support. "We love you, Hailey. Speaking your truth is always brave. Anxiety is real. You showed up anyway." That's everything. So proud of her for facing her fear. Others weren't so kind. Clips were edited with dramatic music. Comment sections filled with critiques about her voice, her body language, her lack of charisma. There were those who said she should have stayed quiet, that she wasn't built for this, that she had nothing to say. And somewhere in between those extremes, there were headlines. Polite on the surface, but cutting between the lines. Hailey Bieber falters during emotional speech. Model opens up, but loses her voice. A rare misstep in a polished public life. It didn't matter that she had spent weeks preparing, that she had shown up despite her fear. The internet, as always, had made up its mind. For Hailey, it felt like drowning in a pool she had built herself, one she hoped would be full of meaning, but that had swallowed her instead. She considered pulling back again, deleting the posts, canceling interviews, retreating into the curated calm she knew so well. But something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe, finally, it was a deeper part of her that said, "This is exactly why you had to do it." Because if even one person saw her falter and felt less alone in their own anxiety, maybe it hadn't been a failure at all. In the days that followed, she stayed quiet, but not in the way she had before. This wasn't silence rooted in fear. This was space. Space to feel, to process, to let the noise pass. Justin was her anchor. He didn't offer solutions, just presence. Just arms around her in the kitchen. Late night walks without phones. Quiet affirmations. You're brave. You didn't fail. This is the beginning. Her team, the ones who had stood backstage with her, reminded her that vulnerability was never a guarantee of applause. That courage isn't about control. It's about showing up anyway. Friends called. Real ones. Not to gossip. Just to say, "I saw you." That was real. That was powerful. And then something happened. Emails started coming in from young women, strangers, saying they had watched the clip, not to laugh, not to judge, but to find the courage to speak at their own school event, their own work meeting, their own therapy session. One girl wrote, "I have panic attacks when I present in class. I saw your video. And for the first time, I didn't feel weak. I felt like maybe I could still try." Hailey read that email twice, then a third time. She exhaled, and slowly, something inside her began to shift. Yes, the speech didn't go as planned. Yes, she stumbled. Yes, fear showed up and nearly won. But the moment, raw and messy and imperfect, had done something her silence never could. It had connected. In the weeks that followed, she didn't rush to speak again. She didn't chase redemption. She simply lived through the discomfort. And in that space, she began to heal. Not with applause, but with truth. Because sometimes the greatest growth doesn't come from the flawless performance. It comes from surviving the moment you feared most, and still being willing to stand up again. And that quietly, gently, without fanfare, is exactly what Hailey began to do. What do you do after you've fallen in front of everyone? After the moment you feared most actually happens, and the world watches it unfold? You have two choices: retreat or rebuild. And Hailey Bieber chose to rebuild, but not in the way the world expected. She didn't come back with a PR-crafted redemption arc or a viral speech to reclaim her narrative. She didn't throw herself into interviews or explain herself to everyone who misunderstood. Instead, she did something much quieter, much harder. She sat with it. She let the embarrassment wash over her, the fear, the doubt, the shame. She let herself feel it fully, without rushing to escape it. Because the truth is, the only way out of fear is through it. In the weeks following her speech, Hailey stayed mostly offline. She paused her public appearances, not as a retreat, but as a reset. She needed space not to hide, but to hear her own voice again without the noise of the crowd. She spent time at home, with Justin, with friends who didn't want her to perform, didn't need her to be perfect. She went to therapy. She journaled. She prayed. She returned to the basics of who she was before the comments, before the headlines, before the world turned her vulnerability into content. And slowly, she started to speak again, not on a stage, but in smaller ways. She recorded a podcast episode where she addressed the moment honestly. No script, no notes, just her sitting at a mic telling the truth. It didn't go the way I wanted. I was scared. I messed up, but I'm still here. And I'm going to keep showing up, even if I shake through every word. The response was different this time. More human, more understanding, more real. People weren't just applauding her for being polished, they were thanking her for being honest. Because in her broken moment, she had unknowingly given others permission to be imperfect too. She leaned into her brand, Rhode, with more intention, not just as a business, but as a platform for wellness, mental health, and authentic conversations. She invited guests to talk not only about beauty, but about fear, failure, and finding strength in unexpected places. And most importantly, she began to let go of the need to prove anything. She no longer chased perfection. She no longer measured herself by how well she could perform under pressure. She realized bravery isn't about getting it right the first time. It's about getting back up the second time, even when no one's clapping. Hailey began to show up in public again, more grounded, more relaxed. The same cameras still followed her. The same headlines still tried to tell her story. But something had shifted. She wasn't performing for them anymore. She was living for herself. And that fear, the one that had once ruled her life, didn't disappear. It still whispered, still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. Because now she had evidence. Evidence that the worst had happened. And she had survived. She had stumbled in the spotlight and still stood tall. She had spoken with a trembling voice and still been heard. And that, more than anything, became her quiet triumph. So, what do you do after everything goes wrong? You pause. You heal. You tell the truth. And then, when you're ready, you speak again. Not for applause. Not for redemption. But because you refuse to let fear have the final word. This is not the story of Hailey Bieber's failure. This is the story of her becoming. And it's only just beginning. You're one of us. Stay curious, stay brave. Like, subscribe, and never miss a twist.